This sword, right here, is not called the Sword of Actuation. It actually has another name that is not expressed fully in the English language. Let's talk about that. Now, Skull Knight's sword is a thorned sword that is wielded against inhuman creatures of the night, commonly referred to as apostles. While powerful in its own right, Skull Knight has a unique magic trick, as it were, that he demonstrated in chapter 221 of the manga, where he ingested the sword and subsequently covered it with baylets around the surface. Or, as he described it, I refined within myself baylets taken from the apostles to form this blade, the Sword of Actuation. Now, before we get into the details of the Sword of Actuation's powers, I want to discuss the name of the sword itself. The Japanese name of the sword is Yobimizu no Tsurugi, which literally means baylet sword, or to be more precise, Baharit Sword. But that's a topic for another day. Now in Japanese, the word for Yobimizu means to prime a water pump, and Tsurugi is a Japanese sword, specifically a double-edged sword. So to prime something is to prepare it for action, and to actuate something, you're activating it or stimulating it. So in this sense, the translation makes sense. However, you'll notice that they're missing a key detail from the Japanese word Yobimizu, that being the inclusion of water. And as it turns out, this is no trivial omission, because it may offer a new perspective on the baylets and the idea of evil that may have not been considered in the past. Now, in the original Volume 13 version of Chapter 82, the baylets are referred to as Ikai Ino Yobimizu. I'm probably saying that incorrectly, so apologies for the mispronunciations. Now, this literally translates to primed droplets connecting to the beyond. Now, in both instances, each word utilizes Yobimizu, which means they're both connecting to and/or representing water. For the baylets, this should come as no surprise. When Griffith sinks into the deep layers of the astral realm, we see a visual of light reflecting off of the water's surface. And as he sinks deeper and deeper, the light slowly dims and completely disappears. He is then confronted by a swirling pool of water that is expelling baylets out of the abyss into the physical world. And I quote, "They are splashes, droplets of idea that have spilled from the sea to eternity, summons to the other world." And the droplets come from the ocean of feelings, that is the idea of evil, the common consciousness that transcends individuality. In fact, the dark side of humankind is a swelling ocean that pours out into the river that is causality. This is confirmed by Slan in chapter 88. Either way, the leaping of one fish would never disturb the flow of the river, i.e. causality. Now, water is immensely important in Berserk and to the astral realm. As Donin pointed out in chapter 344, dreams are part of the astral realm. Essentially, think of it like this. The astral realm equals water, and water equals dreams. And this is exactly how Swiss psychologist Carl Jung viewed the unconscious regions of the brain. The unconsciousness equaled water, and water equaled dreams. And like any massive body of water, like an ocean or lake, we can easily inspect the surface, but the depth and the detail underneath it is both dark and vast. In fact, recent developments in neuroscience have proved that the unconscious processes of the brain dwarf the conscious mind, meaning that the part of us that we identify as us, the quote-unquote I, is not really in control whatsoever. Kind of sounds like causality in a way, doesn't it?
At least it is true that man has no control, even over his own will.
Now, to more easily visualize the situation, take a look at this iceberg. The top is how we view ourselves based on everyday interactions. The ice below the surface is comprised of various personal memories of our past life experiences. And the waters are deep-seated emotions, instincts, and archetypes that are innate within all of us, i.e. the human species. Now, to translate this into Berserk terminology, we could modify the image as so. Now remember, the baylets are prime droplets connecting to the beyond. Essentially, they are components of the collective unconscious, the emotions of our psyche that have often been represented through archetypal entities. In the case of Berserk, the God Hand. It's no surprise that Mira drew an image of Femto emerging from a baylet itself, emerging from the waters of the abyss to represent the archetypal urge for power. Void representing the archetypal sage and knowledge seeker, Slan, the urge for lust and pain, Ubik, the artful deceiver, and Conrad, the gluttonous toxic one. Now in Carl Jung's model of the psyche, he describes another personified structure known as the shadow. This is the repressed portion of a person's psyche that they refuse to show to others. For example, in the case of Griffith, he showed the Hawks his egalitarian mindset, kindness, and playfulness. His repressed shadow self, therefore, is expressed through femto, in the form of a power-hungry individual who is sparse with his words to whom he considers as inferior to him. In this sense, the acceptance of one's apostle form is the acceptance of one's shadow self. Now, in Carl Jung's individuation process, one attempts to integrate their shadow into the conscious self to become a more complete individual. In the case of an apostle or Godhand member, they are severing their ties with humanity, severing their ties with their conscious self, to embrace their shadow form. In effect, it's a failed attempt at individuation. Now, Guts' Berserker armor, in my estimation, is a magical fetish that harnesses the power of Guts' inner shadow, i.e. Beast of Darkness. In a way, it's simulating becoming an apostle for a brief period of time, hence the reason it's incredibly dangerous to use for any length of time. It also explains this quote in chapter 242, "The roar of the sea, it swells blackly from the expanse of the dark night. It draws me down to the deep seabed, a booming like roar." Now, with the astral realm being akin to a large body of water, Miura is telling the reader that Guts, by donning his own personal shadow, is being drawn to the deepest layers of the astral realm each time he uses the Berserker armor. Beware that when fighting with monsters, you yourself do not become a monster. For when you gaze long into the abyss gazes also into you. With all this in mind, we finally circle back to the Baharit Sword itself. A sword that is likened to water, and as we've discussed, water represents the darkness of the unconscious. In effect, we have a sword, which is physical, that is covered in an entity that is astral and unconscious. It has the ability of cleaving through the deepest layers of the astral realm and opening a door that allows the physical and astral realms to merge with each other, as seen in chapter 304. Now, when the astral realm started overlapping with the physical, it was described as the Great Astral Roar. But I want you to take notice of something. When the people of the world are touched by this light, their bodies start to ripple as if they're in water. Take note of Guts' body, for example. It's as if he's passing through a stream of water. Then we have the perspective of Earth, where a gigantic wave of light is enveloping the entire planet. Miura even shows a full spread panel of the moon's perspective of this incident. This is rather interesting because the moon symbolically represents the unconscious. Therefore, Miura is portraying the idea that the unconscious is enveloping the physical, just as it did during the eclipse, which is an event when the moon blocks out the sun's rays. Now, in chapter 344, Gedfring refers to the event as the Great Roar of the Astral World. But, like the name of the Baharit Sword, this is not a perfect translation. In Japanese, Gedfring calls the Great Roar Dayu Kaisho. And if you translate the kanji via an online translator, you get the Great Shadow Realm Roared. Pretty much the same thing as Great Roar, the Astral Realm. However, the kanji for sho, which does translate into roar, is somewhat right, but the actual meaning in this scenario is different. Here's the thing. While the sho kanji means great exhalation or roar by itself, its meaning changes when combined into a 4 kanji expression, as Miura has done here. Therefore, the last half, kaisho, means tidal wave. Thus, a more accurate translation of the event then becomes Great Wave of the Astral World. Now, considering all the evidence that I laid out concerning the astral realm and its allusions to water, this makes a lot of sense. Speaking of waves, when we go back to chapter 237, Shirka mentions something rather interesting. My mistress spoke of it. She said it, the sea, leads to the astral world. Beautiful, graceful, ominous, and dreadful. A spectacle that touches everyone's heartstrings in such a way. Such a place must be connected to the astral world, she said. Again, water is used as a metaphor for the astral realm. But there's another pivotal piece of information about this quote. The part pertaining to the spectacle that touches everyone's heartstrings. This is important because we know the idea of evil exists within the deepest regions of the astral realm, the deepest parts of the ocean as it were, and the idea of evil is known by its core component, which is a giant heart. Now, Chapter 325 portrays the powerful influence of the idea of evil when Guts fights the sea god from within. And it's no coincidence that when Guts battles the heart, there are eyes protruding from the surface. In addition, Guts' whole body goes numb and he loses the ability to use his senses, which are all phenomena of the conscious self. Mira even draws this panel of the sea god that is made to look like the abyss itself, like the deep levels of the astral realm. Finally, the idea of evil translates to origin/source in the context of a source of water. But not just any water, primordial water. For humans, primordial water can be seen as amniotic fluid, as that's the source of our birth. For Guts, he was essentially born again as the marrow pulled him from the primordial water of the sea god. And in Carl Jung's psychological model, the collective unconscious is the origin/source of mythologies, motifs, and cultural norms that define human nature. In a sense, it's a pool of ideas and symbols that are shared universally by the human species. In Casca's dreamscape, we see her heart expelling dark swells of emotions, just like the idea of evil. As long as someone exists as a human, they are inevitably controlled through causality. It's almost as if they're a character written into a story. Astral beings like the God Hand can write the story, but are not characters as they are not part of the physical realm. But there is one character who can both write and participate in the story itself. That being Griffith. He now exists beyond the reason of the physical world, where no one in the mortal realm can threaten him. It would be akin to someone in the story challenging the one who wrote it. It cannot be done. And because I already identified Griffith as the veritable Hermes/Mercurius, he is both material and spiritual. He's the devil, a redeeming psychopomp, an evasive trickster, and God's reflection in physical nature. Hermes also serves as the prototype for Christ. And as we already know, the Moonlight Boy exudes characteristics of Christ throughout the series. Now, where Hermes comes from the polytheistic tradition, Christ is rooted in monotheism. Does this mean that Griffith will eliminate the old gods and install himself as the one true god? The one thing that I'll say for certain is that the Baharit Sword will not be the solution to defeating the God Hand. And the reason that I believe this is that the Baharits come from the astral world. Therefore, they're inexorably linked to causality. They can be predicted. When Skull Knight attacked Femto on top of Ganishka, or on top of Shiva, Femto predicted it. In fact, not only did he predict it, he used Skull Knight's strike to open up the portal within Ganishka so that the astral and the physical realms could start melding with each other. He used the Skull Knights for his own purposes. So I believe the solution to defeating the God Hand is either going to come from within, by Griffith destroying them himself, or from Guts with his Dragon Slayer, because as we know from the recent chapters, he was able to cut off a single strand of Griffith's hair, which means that the thousands of apostles that he's defeated has imbued some sort of magical essence into the sword itself that allows it to harm God Hand members. Now, before we end this video, I just want to clear up one thing and give a couple of shout outs. Now, the one thing that I wanted to clear up is the alternate name given to the Sword of Actuation. You'll see some people online calling it the Sword of Resonance. This is in fact a bad translation of the name and has no relevance to Yobimizu no Tsurugi, so that's not a good translation. Don't use the term Sword of Resonance. Now, in terms of shoutouts, I want to give two big shoutouts. One, I want to give a shout out to Puella. She does the translations for skullknight.net on Patreon, so please donate some money to her. She did the translations for these, and they helped me out greatly in composing this whole video. And I also want to give a shout out to skullknight.com as well. The information on their website is always fantastic. They have great resources, great information, and great depth into the series. Particularly the Skullcast has helped me out a lot in terms of organizing my thoughts and giving me new context to a lot of the information that I've thought about in the past. So thank you to both of those people, and thanks for watching, guys. Subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll catch you on the flip side.